In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. It is the first and last truth every soul in this blighted galaxy learns. It is a litany etched into our hearts with the blood of martyrs and the ash of dead worlds. We fight the heretic, the Xenos, the mutant. We fight in the God Emperor's holy name, and we die in uncountable trillions. Hope is a phantom. A miracle is a temporary stay of execution. There are no happy endings. There are only screams, silenced by the thunder of guns and the laughter of thirsting gods. But what if someone from a universe that played by different, infinitely simpler rules fell into our nightmare? Not a god of chaos hungry for souls, not a cunning Xenos overlord, not a divine savior, but a man for whom our endless cosmic struggle was a Tuesday. This is the story of the anomaly, the event the Ordo Malleus now calls the Bald Fall. This is what I saw. My name is Sergeant Marcus, and my world, my faith, my very understanding of reality was shattered by a man in a cheap yellow jumpsuit.
The air on Forge World Metallicus tasted of ozone, rust, and despair. It was a flavor I'd become intimately familiar with over 6 months of grinding, bloody warfare. My unit, the Cadian 112th, what was left of us, was dug into the ruins of a macro-manufactorum, our lasgun barrels hot, our throats raw with thirst and shouted prayers. Before us, the Wa of War Boss Gitsnaka roared, a green tide of muscle, metal, and madness, a sea of orcs that stretched to the smoke-choked horizon. The thunder of their crude artillery was a constant pounding drumbeat against our skulls. "Hold the line! For the Emperor and for Cadia!" I bellowed, the words a familiar hollow mantra. My power sword hummed in my grip, its edge notched and stained Xenos green. "Aye, Sergeant!" my squad echoed, their voices thin against the orcish war cries. We were a handful of stones against an avalanche. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't a warp rift. There was no stink of the Imperium, no demonic cacophony. This was cleaner. A violent, silent rip in the fabric of reality itself, high in the atmosphere. A wound of pure, blinding white light. For a single terrifying moment, the entire battlefield fell silent. Orc, human, all looked up. From that tear, a single tiny speck fell. It was a star, a meteor of impossible origin. It didn't burn with the rage of atmospheric entry. It seemed to push the air aside, a bullet of pure force. There was no trail of fire, only a visible shock wave that rippled outwards, a concentric circle of displaced cloud. "The Emperor provides," one of my men, Evac, whispered, his eyes wide with fervent hope. I said nothing. I had seen miracles before. They usually bled and screamed just like the rest of us. The falling star changed trajectory with an unnatural sharp angle. It wasn't falling. It was aiming. It shot across the sky, a line of incandescent white drawn over the bruised purple and orange of the polluted heavens, heading directly for the heart of the orcish horde. The impact was not an explosion. It was an erasure. A dome of pure white light bloomed on the horizon, silent for a heartbeat, before the sound hit us. It was a physical wave, a wall of noise that knocked men from their feet, shattered what little stained glass remained in the manufactorum, and shook the very bedrock of the world. The ground heaved, and I was thrown against a shattered wall, my carapace armor cracking under the strain. When the light faded and the deafening roar subsided into a ringing silence, we stared. where the central mass of Wa Gitsnaka had been, a concentration of thousands of boys, knobs, and stumpas, there was now a perfectly smooth hemispherical crater, 5 kilometers wide. The earth had been fused to glass, shimmering with a faint internal heat. The orcs at the edges of the blast was simply gone, vaporized. Those further out were tossed like broken dolls, their green bodies smoldering. The orc advance, which had moments before been an unstoppable force, simply stopped. The remaining greenskins looked around, confused. Their Wa energy, that tangible psychic field that made them stronger together, flickered and died. Without a war boss, without the critical mass of their mob, they were just disorganized brutes. A strange quiet descended, broken only by the crackle of fires and the moans of the wounded. The Imperial command channel was a babble of confused, frantic voices. What was it? A new weapon? A cyclonic torpedo? A sign from the Emperor? I keyed my microbead. All squads, report. What in the name of the Golden Throne was that? No one had an answer. We were ordered to advance, to press the advantage. Cautiously, we picked our way through the shattered, smoking ruins, stepping over the dismembered and scorched bodies of orcs. The air stank of cooked meat and ozone. As we approached the rim of the colossal crater, the scale of the devastation truly struck me. This was power on a level I had only ever heard ascribed to the most potent of voidship lances or Titan-grade weaponry. And at the very center of the crater, standing on the smooth, still warm glass, was a single figure. He was a man, a completely unremarkable, bald man dressed in a garish, cheap-looking yellow jumpsuit and a white cape. He was brushing dust off his red gloves, a look of profound boredom on his round face. He had just fallen from the sky. He had just annihilated an entire orc army with his landing, and he looked mildly inconvenienced. "Great," he said, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity in the dead air. His words were in low Gothic, but with a strange, flat accent I had never heard. He looked around, his gaze passing over the apocalyptic devastation, the fused earth, the distant, burning hulks of orc vehicles, and finally settling on us, on me. He scratched his head. Hey, does anyone here know the way to the City Z supermarket?" We stood there, lasguns half raised, mouths agape. Evac had fallen to his knees, praying. I just stared. My mind, a mind honed by decades of warfare and imperial doctrine, refusing to process what I was seeing. The galaxy had just broken, and it was asking for directions to a grocery store. The silence that followed his question was heavier than any artillery barrage. It was the silence of a fundamental law of the universe, being quietly and without ceremony repealed. "Identify yourself," I finally managed to bark out, my voice cracking. My power sword was held in a white-knuckled grip, pointed at the bald man. The rest of my squad fanned out, their lasguns aimed, their hands trembling. The man blinked. "Oh, Saitama, I am a hero for fun." He said it with the same tone a man might use to state his profession as a low-level administratum clerk. He looked past my sword, his dark eyes scanning our battered, soot-stained uniforms. "You guys look like you've had a rough day. Big monster attack?" I stared at him, my mind reeling. A hero for fun. Heresy was the first thought that sprang to mind. This had to be some new, insidious form of chaos trickery, a demon wearing a mundane skin to lower our guard. But there was no taint, no psychic pressure, no feeling of wrongness that always accompanied the ruinous powers. He felt empty, like a null but different, a void where the warp should be, but also where physics should be. "The Orks," I said slowly, gesturing with my sword at the vast smoldering crater. "Did you do this?" Saitama followed my gesture, looking at the destruction he had wrought with what seemed mild curiosity. Did I do that? I was just falling. I guess the landing was a bit harder than I thought." He looked back at me, a flicker of what might have been concern on his face. "Sorry if I caused any trouble. I was aiming for a park." A park. He had been aiming for a park. The sheer, insane disconnect was giving me a migraine. This was beyond any Xenos or heretic I had ever encountered. This was a walking paradox. "Sergeant," Evac whispered, his voice trembling. "He fell from the heavens. He smote the Xenos. He must be a living saint, a messenger of the god Emperor." "He doesn't look like a saint," Kalen muttered. "He looks like a lost civilian." Before I could respond, a low guttural roar echoed from the ruins to our east. The Orks, in their infinite stubborn resilience, were regrouping. A mob of about 30 boys, led by a hulking knob with a power claw, had spotted us. They were charging, their crude shooters blazing. "Contact, east," I yelled, my training taking over. "Defensive positions, focus fire on the knob." Lasbolts streaked through the air, sizzling as they struck orc hide and scrap metal armor. It was like trying to stop a charging Goliath with pebbles. The knob was 20 meters away, 10, its power claw whining, ready to crush me into paste. I braced, my power sword humming, knowing it was a futile last stand. Then Saitama was just there.
He hadn't run. He hadn't teleported. One moment he was standing near me. The next he was directly in the path of the charging knob. It was so fast my eyes refused to track the movement. It was like a single frame of a picked reel had been cut out. The knob, confused by the sudden appearance of this bald human, didn't even slow down. It swung its massive power claw, a blow that could shred plasteel, right at Saitama's head. Splat! It wasn't the sound of metal on flesh. It was the sound of the orc knob's head exploding. Saitama hadn't even thrown a punch. He had simply stood there, and the knob, running at full speed, had smashed its own skull against Saitama's forehead. The green body stumbled forward a few more steps before collapsing in a heap. The charging boys skidded to a halt, their tiny, piggy eyes wide with confusion. Their knob was dead, killed by a bald head. Saitama looked down at the green gore now staining his red gloves with a sigh. Great, this is going to be a pain to wash out. The Orks, enraged by the death of their leader, let out a collective roar and opened fire. A storm of bullets, lasers, and crude rockets converged on Saitama's position. He didn't dodge, he just stood there as the projectiles impacted. The sound was a deafening cacophony of whining slugs and exploding shells. Smoke and dust enveloped him. When the Orks finally ceased fire, their guns empty or overheating, the smoke cleared. Saitama was still standing there, brushing dust off his shoulders. He looked utterly unscathed, not a scratch, not a dent, not even a smudge of soot on his ridiculous costume. The spent shells and slugs lay in a pile at his feet. "Are you done?" he asked, his voice flat. "I still need to find that supermarket." I lowered my power sword, my arm numb, my entire world view, the bedrock of my faith in the Emperor, in the power of the Astra Militarum, in the very nature of conflict, had just been dismantled in under a minute. This was no saint. This was no demon. This was something else entirely. An anomaly, a glitch in the grim dark of reality. And he was our guest.
They took him away, of course. Within the hour, a Valkyrie bearing the sigil of the Ordo Malleus descended from the sky like a vengeful angel. Gray-armored stormtroopers of the Inquisition, their faces hidden behind expressionless helmets, surrounded us. They didn't point their hellguns at Saitama. Their training was too absolute for such a futile gesture. Instead, they formed a perimeter, a wall of ceramite and resolve. The Inquisitor herself, a severe woman with a face like etched granite and a cybernetic eye that glowed with a cold red light, approached. She was Inquisitor Valeriana of the Ordo Malleus, and her reputation was one of purgatorial fire and absolute ruthlessness. She ignored me completely, her gaze fixed on Saitama, who was now sitting on a piece of rubble, poking at a scorched orc skull with a stick. "You are the anomaly," she stated, her voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. Saitama looked up. "Huh? Oh, hey, are you from the city council? About the crater. It was an accident. I'll pay for the damages, I guess." Valeriana's cybernetic eye whirred, no doubt taking in every possible data point. His non-existent psychic signature, his mundane biology, the impossible structural integrity of his cheap costume. I saw a flicker of frustration cross her stern features. Her instruments were telling her he was a baseline human. Her eyes, and the 5-kilometer-wide crater, told her he was anything but. "You will accompany me," she commanded, a tone that had broken heretics and made planetary governors weep. "You are a matter for the Holy Inquisition." Saitama sighed, a long, suffering sound. "More paperwork. Fine, but if this takes too long, I'm going to be really annoyed about missing the sale. 50% off bento boxes is a big deal." He stood up and walked towards the Valkyrie as if he were boarding a public transport shuttle. The stormtroopers fell in around him, their movements crisp and professional, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. They were escorting a supernova in a human-shaped container. I was ordered to accompany them along with Evac as material witnesses. We were flown to a fortified inquisitorial bastion, a stark gray fortress that speared the toxic clouds of Metallicus. Inside it was all stark lighting, polished stone, and the scent of sanctified incense and ozone. It was a place designed to intimidate, to impose the absolute authority of the God Emperor's will. Saitama seemed utterly unimpressed. He looked at the grim-faced servitors, the skull-adorned archways, the scrolling data slates filled with Gothic script, with the same bland curiosity he'd shown the Orks. He was placed in an interrogation chamber, a room of bare plasteel, with a single table and 2 chairs. It was wired with every psycho-reactive and lie detection device known to the Imperium. Inquisitor Valeriana took the seat opposite him. I was ordered to observe from behind a one-way mirror, my microbead feeding me the audio. "State your name and world of origin," she began, her hand steepled. "Saitama, City Z."
There is no registered imperial world by that designation. Is it in the segmentum sola, obscurus? Don't know. It's just a city with a lot of monsters and a really good supermarket. Valeriana's eye twitched. You jumped? From where?
From my apartment. I was trying to jump to the store, but I saw a weird bug thing in the sky. I punched it. There was a bright light, and then I was falling here. He said it with the same casual tone one would use to describe taking a wrong turn on the way to work. You punched a bug thing in the sky? Valeriana repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Yeah, it was pretty big. Annoying, too. The Inquisitor leaned forward. What are you? I told you, a hero for fun. Do you serve the corpse emperor on his golden throne? She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper, probing for any hint of heresy or devotion. Saitama looked confused. A corpse emperor? That sounds gross. Why would anyone serve a corpse? Behind the mirror, I flinched. Evac gasped and made the sign of the Aquila. That single blasphemous sentence would have been enough to condemn 1 billion souls to the pyre. Inquisitor Valeriana did not react with fury. She was too disciplined for that. But her stillness became that of a predator about to strike. Do you know of the primordial truth, the powers that churn in the warp? Do you serve the dark gods? Gods? Warp? Look, lady, I don't know about any of that. I'm just a guy who does 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run every day. That's it. The lie detectors remained silent. The psychoreactive crystals glowed a steady, untroubled blue. The machines were screaming that he was telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. Frustrated, Valeriana decided on a different tack, a test. She had him escorted to a high-security training arena, a vast chamber used for testing the mettle of acolytes and the potency of captured Xenos weapons. Awaiting him was a combat servitor, a hulking brute of fused flesh and metal, armed with a heavy bolter and a power fist. "Destroy it," Valeriana commanded. Saitama looked at the servitor, which was already tracking him with its weapon, its hydraulic systems hissing. Why? It looks expensive. It is your enemy. Destroy it, or it will destroy you. The heavy bolter roared to life, filling the chamber with the sound of mass reactive shells. Saitama didn't move. The shells struck him and detonated. The room filled with smoke and the smell of cordite. When it cleared, he was still standing there, picking his ear. The servitor charged, its power fist crackling with energy, capable of pulverizing a Lehman Russ battle tank. Saitama looked bored. As the power fist came down, he simply flicked his index finger against the servitor's chest. The result was not a dent. It was a disintegration. The entire upper half of the servitor vanished into a fine metallic mist. The legs stood for a moment, then clattered to the floor, sparking. The silence in the observation room was absolute. Tech priests who had been monitoring the servitor's readings were frantically crossing themselves with mechadendrites. Inquisitor Valeriana stared, her face a mask of cold, calculating horror. She had her answer. He was not a psyker. He was not a demon. He was a physical impossibility. A being whose strength defied every known law of the material universe. He was, for all intents and purposes, a god of pure, unadulterated force, and he was utterly, terrifyingly bored. He turned to Valeriana, a hopeful look on his face. So, are we done? Can I go find that supermarket now? The Inquisitor's response was quiet, meant only for the recording devices and herself, but my microbead picked it up. The Emperor protects, but who protects us from him? Saitama was not released. How could he be? He was the most significant existential threat the Imperium had ever encountered. A threat not because of malicious intent, but because of his sheer apathetic power. He was classified as an extremis-level anomalous entity and placed under the observation of Inquisitor Valeriana. In practice, this meant he was given a small, Spartan room in the Bastion and was largely left to his own devices, provided he didn't try to leave. I was assigned to his liaison detail, a fancy term for being the one poor guardsman tasked with trying to explain the nightmare of the 41st Millennium to a man who found it mildly inconvenient. So let me get this straight, Saitama said one day as we walked through one of the Bastion's many austere courtyards. He was munching on a nutrient bar the tech priests had synthesized for him after he'd complained about the rations. There's evil gods made of emotion, green fungus guys who love fighting, bug aliens that eat everything, and pointy-eared aliens who are really full of themselves. That is a crude but accurate summary, yes, I replied, my eyes scanning the parapets for any sign of the ever-watchful inquisitorial stormtroopers. And everyone is fighting everyone else? All the time? Yes, it is the state of the galaxy. Huh, he finished his bar. Sounds exhausting, and really bad for the economy. I wonder there's no good supermarkets. I had given up trying to explain the concept of the imperial tithe or the fact that most worlds were hive cities or death worlds. His frame of reference was bafflingly small and yet infinite at the same time. It was during one of these surreal conversations that the alarms blared, a deep, wailing klaxon that shook the very foundations of the Bastion. Intrusion alert. War detected. All personnel to battle stations. We rushed to the command center. Hololithic displays showed a terrifying sight. War Boss Gitznaka was dead, but a new, bigger, meaner War Boss had risen from the remnants. This one, who called himself War Boss Skullcrusher, had not only unified the surviving Orks, but had been attracted by the tales of the baldy Hummy who had killed the last boss. To an Ork, such a being represented the ultimate challenge, the best fight imaginable. The new Wa was massive. It was a tide of green, hundreds of thousands strong, supported by dozens of gargants. Crude, walking cathedrals of destruction that stood as tall as the Bastion itself. They were smashing through the outer defensive lines, their crude energy weapons blasting apart fortifications that had stood for millennia. The Bastion's void shields will not hold against that concentration of firepower, a tech priest droned. Probability of structural failure, 98.7%. Inquisitor Valeriana was a whirlwind of activity, directing Skitarii legions and her stormtroopers. She turned to me, her face grim. Where is the anomaly? As if on cue, Saitama wandered into the command center, drawn by the noise. What's all the racket? Can't I get a nap around here? The Xenos are attacking, in overwhelming force. We are about to be overrun. Saitama peered at the hololith, at the seething green tide and stomping gargants. Oh, more of those green guys. They really don't give up, do they? Can you stop them? Valeriana asked. It was not a plea. It was a cold, clinical assessment of a weapon's utility. Saitama shrugged. Probably. They're kind of loud. It's annoying. He looked at the main display, where a particularly massive gargant, Skullcrusher's personal machine, was unleashing a torrent of energy and shells at the Bastion's main gate. The void shields flickered violently. That one's the noisiest, Saitama noted. He turned and walked out of the command center, towards the main gate. Saitama,
"Wait," I called out, following him. "You need a plan, armor support, something." He didn't even look back. "Nah, it's fine."
By the time I reached the main battlements, the scene was one of utter chaos. The air was thick with smoke and the roar of engines and weapons. The outer walls were breached in a dozen places, and a sea of orcs was pouring through, engaging the Skitarii in brutal close-quarters combat. The massive Gargant was now only a kilometer away, its guns blazing, each shot carving a canyon through the Imperial defenses. Saitama walked calmly through the maelstrom. Orcs charged him and he ignored them. They would swing their choppas, which would shatter against his head. They would shoot him, the bullets flattening against his chest. He would occasionally swat one aside with a lazy backhand, sending the Xenos flying through the air to explode against a distant wall like an overripe fruit. He was a rock in a raging river, and the green tide simply parted around him, unable to affect him in the slightest. He was walking directly towards the Gargant. The orcs inside the massive war machine saw him. The Gargant's primary gun, a weapon capable of leveling a city block, swiveled down to target the single bald human. It fired with a sound that felt like the end of the world. The beam of raw energy struck Saitama dead on. The resulting explosion blinded everyone on the battlements. When our vision cleared, a crater 100 meters wide smoldered where he had been standing. A great orcish cheer went up. And then, from the center of the crater, Saitama stood up, brushing dust from his costume. He looked up at the Gargant, a faint frown on his face. "You ripped my cape." He bent his knees slightly. It was the first time I had ever seen him take anything resembling a fighting stance. Then he jumped. He didn't fly. He simply pushed off from the ground with such force that the crater he was in expanded another 50 meters, and the shockwave knocked every single orc and Skitarii within a quarter-mile off their feet. He became a blur, a yellow streak that shot up and punched clean through the Gargant's main body, exiting out the other side in a shower of scrap metal and sizzling wiring. The Gargant stood there for a moment, a perfect, clean hole drilled through its core. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, it split in two and crashed to the ground in a pair of colossal, earth-shaking explosions. Saitama landed lightly amidst the wreckage. The orc horde, which had been moments from victory, fell silent. Their biggest, baddest war machine had been destroyed by a single punch. No, not even a punch. A jump. The war field, that collective orcish psychic belief, shattered. Their belief that they were the toughest things around had just been objectively, incontrovertibly proven false. A collective confused "what?" rippled through the horde. And then they broke. The orcs, deprived of their fun and their certainty, turned on each other or simply fled. The battle for the bastion was over. Saitama walked back through the fleeing orcs, who now were ignoring him completely. He approached the main gate, where Inquisitor Valorana and I stood, our faces doubtless mirrors of stunned disbelief. He held up a torn piece of white cloth. "Hey, you guys have a tailor here? This was a limited edition." Inquisitor Valorana looked from the obliterated Gargant to the routed orc army, to the man complaining about his cape. She did not speak. She simply turned and walked back into the bastion, her shoulders stiffer than I had ever seen them. The Imperium had just witnessed its salvation and its potential doom, all in the form of a bored bald man. And we had no idea what to do with him.
The victory over Wog's Skull Crusher should have been a time for celebration.
Instead, a pall of deep, unsettling dread fell over the inquisitorial bastion. We had witnessed a power that made the cyclonic torpedoes of the Imperial Navy seem like firecrackers. A power that was not derived from faith, from technology, or from the warp. It was just there. Inquisitor Valeriana became a ghost, haunting the Bastion Strategium and her private chambers. Reports flew via astropath to the highest levels of the Inquisition and the Administratum. I knew because I was the one tasked with delivering Saitama's meals, and I saw the haunted look in the eyes of the junior interrogators. They were dealing with a theological and existential crisis that could shatter the Imperium. If the God Emperor, in all his divine might, was the only beacon of hope for humanity, what did that make Saitama? A rival god? A refutation of the need for divinity altogether? The implications were heresy of the highest order. Saitama, for his part, was blissfully unaware. He spent his days sleeping, doing his daily workout routine, which, to my amazement, really did seem to consist of exactly 100 push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, and a 10-kilometer run, and complaining about the food. The fabricators had managed to repair his cape, but he was still grumpy about missing his supermarket sale. It was about 2 weeks after the Ork attack that the whispers started. Not literal whispers at first. It was a feeling, a pressure change in the air, a greasy sensation on the skin that no amount of sanctified incense could purge. The astropaths began to suffer from debilitating migraines, babbling about a great eye opening and a song of ruin being sung from the Imperium. Inquisitor Valeriana knew the signs. She summoned me to her chambers. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of data slates and a single candle beneath a golden aquila. "The Runionist powers have taken notice, Sergeant," she said, her voice hollow. "The anomaly's actions have created a ripple, a disturbance in the warp of unprecedented nature. Such a concentration of effortless, non-psychic power is an affront to them. It is a puzzle they must solve, a power they must corrupt, or a threat they must eradicate." "Which is it?" I asked, my throat dry. "All of them," she replied. "We have intercepted faint cultist transmissions. They speak of the Bolded One, a being of pure potential, untouched by the warp. They believe he is a key to unlocking a new form of ascension, or perhaps to unseating the great game itself. The Word-Bearer's warband, the scions of the unspoken, are coming. They will try to turn him." The name sent a chill down my spine. The Word-Bearers, the first and most fanatical of the traitor legions. They would not send a mere raiding party. They would send a force designed for corruption and annihilation. "Can we stop them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Our defenses are formidable, but against a dedicated assault by a Legion warband," she shook her head, "our only hope is him, and we have no way to control him, no way to even reason with him. How do you convince a force of nature to fight on your behalf?" She had no answer. Neither did I. The attack came, not with a roar, but with a silent, sickening tear in reality itself. In the central courtyard where Saitama often did his runs, the air began to bleed. The stonework bubbled and flowed like wax. A warp rift, no larger than a man at first, hissed into existence, vomiting the stench of brimstone and corrupted flesh. From the rift stepped a figure that made my soul shrivel. It was a Marine, but his power armor was a twisted, spiked parody of its original form, covered in blasphemous runes and weeping sores. It was a Chaos Space Marine, a bearer of the Word. He held a Crozius Arcanum, a mace that wreathed with dark energy. A dark apostle. "I am Malachor,
and I have come for the unspoken promise. I have come for the bolded god." Alarms blared. Stormtroopers and Skitarii poured into the courtyard, opening fire. Their laze bolts and solid slugs spattered harmlessly against Malakor's corrupted warplate. He didn't even acknowledge them. His eyes, glowing with a malevolent red light, scanned the area.
"Where is he?" Malakor thundered. "Bring forth the vessel of pure potential. He shall be anointed in the blood of worlds and become the new voice of Lorgar. He shall be our ultimate champion." It was then that Saitama, drawn by the commotion, wandered out of a side door, munching on a new experimental nutrient bar the tech priests had made. "Hey, what's with the ugly guy? And what's that smell? Did something die?" Malakor's head snapped towards him. His psychic senses, so attuned to the roaring power of the warp, would have found Saitama baffling. A silent, empty space. "You," he hissed, pointing his Crozius, "this blank, this null." He seemed almost disappointed. "No matter. The gods have willed it. You will be remade. You will be filled with glorious, chaotic power." Saitama finished his bar. "Look, I don't know what you're selling, but I'm not interested. Your sales pitch needs work, and you're making a mess of the courtyard." Malakor roared in fury and charged, his Crozius swinging, trailing flames and the screams of demons. The blow would have vaporized a tank, sundered a soul. Saitama sidestepped it with a casual, almost lazy movement. The Crozius smashed into the ground, carving a molten furrow in the stone. "Huh, you're faster than the green guys, but you telegraph your moves too much." Enraged, Malakor unleashed a torrent of warp fire from his free hand, a stream of pure reality-bending hatred. Saitama stood there and took it. The fire washed over him, scorching the ground around him to black glass, but he remained untouched, his costume unsinged. "That's a neat trick, but it's kinda hot. Can you turn it down? I just had a shower." Malakor staggered back, his confidence shattered. "Impossible. No mortal can withstand the fires of the Imperium. What are you?" Saitama's expression finally shifted from boredom to mild annoyance. "I told you, I'm a hero for fun, and you're being a real nuisance." He took a single step forward and threw a punch. It wasn't his serious punch. It was, I suspect, what he considered a light tap, a normal punch. There was no shockwave this time, no cataclysmic explosion. The physics were too localized, too absolute. Malakor, the dark apostle of the word-bearers, in his ancient and powerful Terminator armor, simply ceased to exist. Not turned to paste, not disintegrated. He was deleted. One moment he was a towering icon of heresy and terror. The next, there was nothing but a faint, quickly fading after-image. The warp rift slickered and snapped shut with a sound like a sigh. The courtyard was silent once more. The stormtroopers lowered their weapons, their faces hidden behind helmets, but their posture spoke of utter bewilderment. Saitama looked at the spot where Malakor had been, then at the scorched ground. He sighed. "Great, now the courtyard's a mess again. You guys really need to work on your pest control." He turned and walked back inside, leaving us alone with the silence, the scorched marks, and the terrifying knowledge that we had just seen a champion of the dark gods be swatted away like a gnat. The ruinous powers had taken their shot, and they had failed. But the galaxy is vast, and the eyes of the gods are many. They were now truly, fully aware of the anomaly in their midst, and the game had only just begun. The silence that followed the death of the Dark Apostle was different from the one after the Ork battles. That had been the silence of shock, of awe. This was the silence of a profound, soul-deep terror. We had faced a servant of the arch-enemy, a being whose very presence could corrupt the unwary, and the man we housed had erased him from existence with a gesture so casual it was insulting. Inquisitor Valeriana became more reclusive than ever. The astropathic choirs reported a new, unsettling quiet in the warp around Metallicus. The demonic presences that constantly gibbered at the edges of reality had pulled back, as if observing from a safer distance. Saitama was a stone thrown into the pond of the Imperium, and the denizens of the deep were cautiously examining the ripples. It was during this period of tense quiet that the Tyranids came. The first warning was the failure of the astropathic relay. Communication with neighboring systems simply died. Then the system's sun began to dim, as if a great shadow was passing before it. Long-range auger arrays detected a splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Leviathan, drawn by the massive biosignatures of the Orks and the unique, potent energy signature of Saitama's arrival. To the hive mind, a being of such concentrated physical perfection was the ultimate prize, a genetic specimen to be consumed, dissected, and added to the great evolutionary library. The strategy meeting in the Bastion's command center was a funeral dirge. Hololithic displays showed the Tyranid fleet, a cloud of chitinous horrors blotting out the stars. They were bypassing the Imperial Navy pickets with ease, their trajectory a direct line for Forge World Metallicus. "They are here not for the world," a pale-faced Magos biologist stated. "They are here for the anomaly. The hive mind has designated entity Saitama as a primary target for assimilation. Its psychic shadow is unique, a void of immense density. They crave it. Can we evacuate him? And lead a hive fleet directly into the heart of the segmentum?" Valeriana's voice was sharp. "No, we make our stand here. We fight, and we die. And we pray the God Emperor accepts our souls." The mood was one of grim finality. We were looking at the end. Saitama, who had been brought to the command center, was peering at the Hollow-Earth with a curious expression. "So those are the bug aliens you mentioned, the ones that eat everything?" "Yes," I said, my voice heavy. "They will land, and they will consume all biomass on this world. Us, the Orks, everything. They cannot be reasoned with. They only hunger." "Huh." Saitama leaned closer. "They look kind of ugly. Do they taste good?" The question was so absurd, it broke the tension in the room for a moment, leaving only a void of stunned silence. "That is not a question we have ever sought to answer," the Magos biologist replied, utterly nonplussed. The Tyranid invasion began with a rain of mycetic spores, thousands of them streaking through the atmosphere like malignant comets. They crashed into the plains around the bastion, birthing a nightmare tide of gaunts, warriors, and larger, more horrific bioforms. This was not the disorganized rush of the Orks. This was a calculated synaptic swarm, a single organism with 1 billion bodies moving with terrifying coordination. The bastion's guns spoke, filling the sky with flak and laser fire. But for every spore that was destroyed, 10 more landed. The plains became a seething chitinous carpet flowing towards our walls. "They're testing our defenses," Valeriana said. "The big ones will come soon." She was right. Lumbering up from the rear of the swarm came carnifexes, living battering rams. Flying hive crones and harpies darkened the sky, and leading the assault was a beast of monstrous proportions, a hierophant biotitan, a mountain of living artillery, its guns already charging with bioplasma. Our walls would not hold. Our guns would not stop it. "Saitama," Valeriana said, turning to him,
Her voice held no request, only a stark statement of fact. "That large one, the Biotitan, it is the greatest threat." Saitama looked at the Hierophant, which was now unleashing a volley of plasma that vaporized an entire section of the bastion's battlements. The resulting explosion rocked the entire fortress. "Okay, that one is definitely too loud. It's going to wake me up for my nap." He walked towards the balcony overlooking the battlefield. The scene below was hell incarnate, a swirling melee of Skitarii, stormtroopers, and a seemingly endless horde of screeching and slashing Xenos. "You'll need a Thunderhawk to get you out there," an officer yelled. Saitama ignored him. He simply jumped from the balcony.
This jump was different from the one against the Gargant. That had been a vertical leap. This was a projectile. He shot across the battlefield like a laser beam, a yellow streak that cut a perfectly straight, clear line through the heart of the Tyranid swarm. Where he passed, Tyranids simply exploded into chitinous pulp as if an invisible, mile-wide plow was carving a path. In less than a second, he was in front of the Hierophant Bio-Titan. The colossal creature, guided by the single mind of the Hive fleet, saw him. Every gun, every weapon on its vast body swiveled to target the insignificant human before it. The synaptic imperative to consume this unique being was overriding all other commands. Saitama landed on the ground in front of the Titan. He looked up at the mountain of flesh and guns. Serious? Punch. He didn't shout it. He simply said the words, a quiet statement of intent. He threw a single, straightforward punch. There was no sound. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, the air solidified. The punch didn't create a shockwave. It created a vacuum, a tunnel of nullified physics that shot from his fist. It struck the Hierophant. The Bio-Titan did not explode. It did not collapse. It vanished. The entire city-sized organism was atomized, erased from the front backwards as if a giant cosmic eraser had been dragged across it. The beam of force continued, carving a canyon through the heart of the Tyranid swarm, extending to the horizon and punching a hole clean through the atmosphere, allowing the cold light of the stars to shine through for a brief, terrifying moment. The synaptic screech that echoed across the planet was not a sound, but a psychic death scream that erupted in the minds of every living thing. The Tyranid swarm, which had been a single, coordinated entity, shattered. The loss of the Hierophant and the sudden, absolute severance of the hive mind's control from this sector of the swarm caused instant systemic collapse. The creatures stopped moving in unison. They began to attack each other or simply stood still, their higher functions severed. The battle was over. Back in the command center, the silence was broken only by the static from the auger screens. The massive, continent-sized bioship in orbit that had been commanding the Splinter Fleet was now moving, turning away from the planet. The hive mind, having calculated the odds, had deemed the cost of assimilating entity Saitama to be unacceptably high. It was cutting its losses. Saitama landed back on the balcony, his expression one of mild satisfaction. That should take care of the noise. He then noticed a small sticky piece of Tyranid ichor on his glove. He frowned. Ew, gross. He walked back inside, leaving us to stare at the new artificial canyon that now dominated the landscape, a permanent monument to a power that could frighten away a god of consumption. The hive mind, a consciousness that spanned galaxies, had looked upon Saitama and had chosen to flee. We had witnessed the impossible for the third time, and we knew, with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that our galaxy would never be the same. Saitama looked at her. "Are you here to fight too? Because I'm kinda tired of it." A faint smile seemed to touch Taldir's hidden lips. "No, child of another sky. We are not here to fight you. We are here to warn you, and to warn these others about you." She turned to Valeriana. "Your reports, Inquisitor, speak of a weapon, a tool. You are fools. You house a cataclysm. His every action creates fractures in the path of fate. His destruction of the Ork War diverted a war that was destined to destroy a key chaos cult world. His annihilation of the Dark Apostle has created a power vacuum that 3 rival war bands are now fighting to fill, spilling war into a sector that was at peace. His repulsion of the hive mind has caused it to redirect its splinter fleet towards a vulnerable exodite world." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "He is not solving your problems. He is shattering the game board. The consequences are unpredictable. And for my people who navigate the streams of fate, he is the ultimate storm, a typhoon of causality." "What would you have us do?" Valeriana asked, her voice cold. "There is a convergence," Taldir said, her gaze returning to Saitama. "A point in the near future. A black stone fortress, adrift in the goal stars, has been activated by a cabal of heretics. They seek to use its power not to destroy worlds, but to tear a permanent, stable rift into the warp, a new eye of terror. The currents of fate show that this event will draw the Anat-Ra. His absolute physicality is a foil to the fortress's warp-based weaponry. He is the only being who can walk through its defenses unscathed. You want us to send him on your errand," Valeriana scoffed. "I am showing you the path where his unique nature can be applied to a threat that endangers the entire galaxy, not just your little world. The path that causes the least amount of collateral damage to the tapestry of fate. Ignore this, and his continued presence here will inevitably attract something even you cannot imagine. Perhaps the Silent King himself will awaken from his slumber to behold this paradox. Or worse, the dragon of Mars may stir." The threats were ones I barely understood, but the gravity in her voice was unmistakable. Saitama, who had been listening with a bored expression, perked up. "A fortress? In space? Is it cool?" Taldir looked at him, her head tilted. "It is a place of great danger and ancient power." "Sounds more interesting than sitting here," Saitama said with a shrug. "Okay, I'll go check it out." The decision was made. Just like that. Not by the Lord Militant, not by the High Lords of Terra, not by the Inquisition. By a bored man looking for a distraction. We were going to the Ghoul Stars. We were going to assault a Blackstone fortress. And our primary weapon was a man who was more concerned with finding a decent meal than saving the galaxy. The echo of his punch was still reverberating across the stars, and now we were following it into the darkest reaches of space.
In the wake of the Tyranid retreat, a strange sort of routine settled over the bastion. The immediate world-ending threats were gone. The Orks were scattered and leaderless, the word-bearers had been dealt a stunning blow, and the Great Devourer had fled.
Forge World Metallicus began the long, arduous process of healing, though it now bore a 5-kilometer-wide glass crater and a brand-new canyon as permanent scars. Saitama's existence, however, was a secret that was becoming increasingly impossible to keep. The Ork Wa had been witnessed by millions of Imperial soldiers. The defeat of the Chaos Marine and the Bio-Titan, while seen by far fewer, had created ripples that were spreading through the Imperium's vast and leaky bureaucracy. Rumors of a bolded saint or a imperial fist incarnate were spreading like wildfire through the troop barracks and lower decks of the fleet. Inquisitor Valeriana was fighting a desperate, behind-the-scenes war of information containment. She was drowning in demands from reports from other Ordos, from Space Marine chapters, and even from a High Lord of the Administratum. Everyone wanted to know what had happened on Metallicus. Everyone wanted to claim the anomaly for their own purposes. I was her primary interface with Saitama, a role I was finding increasingly surreal. I had gone from a frontline sergeant to the caretaker of a human-shaped superweapon. One day, I found Saitama in his room, staring out the window at the new canyon. He had an uncharacteristically thoughtful look on his face. "Hey, Marcus," he said, without turning around. "This place? It's really messed up, isn't it?" "It is a time of perpetual war, sir," I said carefully. "It's not just the fighting, it's everything. The food is terrible, everyone is so serious all the time, the buildings are all gray and pointy, there's no parks, no vending machines, no TV." He turned to look at me. "Back home, even with all the monsters, there was still normal stuff. People going to work, kids playing, sales at the supermarket. Here, it's just war, all the time. It's boring." I was speechless. He had single-handedly defeated the greatest threats this sector had seen in a century, and his summary was that it was boring. The sheer, monumental disconnect was staggering. "This is the reality for humanity. We fight to survive. There is little room for normalcy." "But that's stupid," he said, with the simple, unassailable logic of a child. "If you're always fighting, when do you get to enjoy the stuff you're fighting for?" It was a question that had plagued philosophers and preachers for 10,000 years. I had no answer for him. But his boredom was about to be interrupted from an unexpected quarter. A ship arrived in system, not an Imperial vessel, but a sleek, elegant craft of Xenos design. It was an Eldari ship from the craft world of Bieltan. They demanded, in haughty and imperious tones, an audience with the Monkey who casts no shadow in the warp. The Eldari delegation was brought to the bastion under heavy guard. They were as alien as the Tyranids, but in a way that was cold and refined rather than bestial. Their leader was a Farseer, an ethereal being named Taldir, her face hidden by an ornate helm, her body swathed in flowing robes. She stood before Inquisitor Valeriana and, to our surprise, bowed slightly in Saitama's direction. "Anatra," she said, her voice a melodic chime that held an undercurrent of immense age and sorrow. "The unseen. We have felt your silence, a null in the chorus of fate, so absolute it creates its own destiny."
The journey into the Ghoul Stars was a passage into a different kind of nightmare. Where the warp was a sea of chaotic emotion, this region of space was a void, a graveyard of dead suns and forgotten horrors. The light from distant stars was thin and sickly, and the silence of the void felt heavy, oppressive. The inquisitorial cruiser, the Righteous Fury, was a speck of faith in an ocean of despair. On board, the mood was tense. We were accompanied by a hand-picked detachment of Grey Knights, the Emperor's own demon-hunting space marines. Their presence was a measure of the threat we faced. They kept their distance from Saitama, their psychic auras visibly agitated by his null-like presence. To them, he was an absence, a hole in the world where the warp should be. Saitama, for his part, spent most of the trip in the ship's gym, which had been reinforced with the strongest adamantium and plasteel the tech priests could muster. He was still doing his same simple routine. The Grey Knights watched him, their stern faces unreadable, but I could sense their disbelief. This was the being the Eldari Farseer claimed could decide the fate of a Blackstone fortress? After weeks of perilous navigation, we found it. The Blackstone Fortress. It was not a thing built by human hands, or any hands we could comprehend. It was an angular, geometric nightmare of black rock and glowing green energy, the size of a small moon. It pulsed with a malevolent intelligence, and space itself seemed to warp around its impossible angles. A faint psychic scream echoed through the bridge of our ship, a sound that promised madness and oblivion. "The fortress's shields are active," the ship's master reported. "They are a hybrid void warp barrier. No Imperial weapon can penetrate them. Attempting to do so would cause a feedback loop that would vaporize our ship." Inquisitor Valeriana turned to Saitama. He was standing at the viewport, looking at the fortress. "Well," she asked, "can you get us in?" Saitama studied the fortress for a moment. "How?" We do not know," she admitted. "The Eldari Farseer said you were the key." "The front door looks kinda thin." Before anyone could stop him, he punched the reinforced armor glass of the viewport. The material, designed to withstand micrometeorite impacts, exploded outwards into the void. The breach was instantly plunged into chaos as the atmosphere screamed out. Emergency blast shields slammed down, containing the breach. Alarms wailed. Through the remaining viewports, we saw it. Saitama's punch hadn't just broken the window. The force of it, projected into the void, had traveled across the thousands of kilometers of empty space and struck the Blackstone Fortress's shield. The shield didn't buckle or overload. It shattered. Like a pane of glass hit by a bullet, the immense energy field fractured into a billion glittering fragments of dissipating light before vanishing completely. The psychic scream from the fortress intensified into a shriek of pure, undiluted rage. "Well, that's one way to do it," one of the junior officers muttered, his face pale. The Grey Knights were already moving. "The teleportarium is active," their Justicar intoned. "We strike now while the defenses are down." A strike team was assembled, a full squad of Grey Knights, Inquisitor Valeriana, myself, and Saitama. We gathered in the teleportarium chamber. The Grey Knights began their pre-battle rituals, chanting litanies of protection and smearing sacred unguents on their Nemesis Force weapons. Saitama watched them, looking puzzled. Are we going or not? The teleportation was a nauseating lurch, a sensation of being unmade and remade. We materialized inside the fortress, and the feeling was 1,000 times worse than the warp. The air was thick and cold, and the geometry of the corridors was all wrong. Walls met at impossible angles, stairs led to ceilings, and the very air seemed to whisper with the voices of the damned.
The heretics and their demonic allies were waiting for us. Cultists in red robes chanted over arcane machinery, while hulking obliterators, marines whose flesh was fused with heavy weapons, opened fire. Daemons of Tsinch, shifting multi-limbed horrors of blue and pink flesh, swooped from the crazed architecture. The Grey Knights met them head-on. Their force weapons hummed, smiting daemons back into the warp, their storm bolters roaring. It was a battle of faith and fire against sorcery and steel. Saitama walked through it all. A stream of plasma from an obliterator washed over him. He kept walking. A daemon tried to ensnare him in a cage of shifting light. He stepped through it as if it were cobwebs. A cultist leaped at him with a chain blade. The blade shattered on his neck, and the cultist fell back, screaming as his own weapon backfired. Saitama's goal was not the heretics, nor the daemons. He was following the source of the Saitic scream, the core of the fortress's power. He seemed to sense it, drawn to the greatest concentration of noise. We fought our way after him, the Grey Knights clearing a path through the hordes that Saitama simply ignored. We descended deeper into the mad geometry, into the heart of the fortress. We finally reached the core chamber. It was a vast, spherical space, and at its center floated a pulsating green crystal that throbbed with the power of a captive star. Around it, the lead heretic, a creature more machine than man, was conducting a final ritual, his mechadendrites plugged directly into the crystal. "The rift," he cackled, his voice a synthetic screech. "It opens! The great ocean will flood this reality! All will be changed! All will be—" Saitama punched the crystal. It was not a dramatic blow. It was the same normal punch he had used on the Dark Apostle. The crystal did not shatter. It unexisted. The effect was instantaneous. The psychic scream cut off. The wrong geometry of the fortress groaned and began to shift, the walls grinding as they tried to reorient themselves into a physically possible structure. The heretic stared at the empty space where the crystal had been, his cackle dying in his vocoder. My masterpiece," he whimpered. Then the daemons, their anchor to reality severed, were pulled screaming back into the warp. The heretics, their minds broken by the sudden silence, fell to the ground, twitching. The Blackstone fortress was neutralized. Not with an army, not with a fleet, but with a single, bored punch. The Grey Knights stood in silence, their weapons lowered. They looked at Saitama, then at each other. They had dedicated their lives to fighting the most horrific threats in the galaxy, and this man had just solved one of the greatest with less effort than it took to swat a fly. Saitama looked around the now quiet chamber. So that was it? Kinda anticlimactic. He spotted a strange glowing widget on the floor, a piece of the heretic's technology. He picked it up, examined it, and shrugged, putting it in his pocket. Souvenir, I guess. We teleported back to the ship. The fortress, now inert and slowly crumbling, hung in the void behind us. The mission was a success. A galactic threat had been averted, but as I looked at Saitama, who was already complaining to a servitor about the lack of snacks on the return trip, I felt no triumph, only a deep, chilling unease. We had used a hammer to fix a watch, and we had no idea what we had broken in the process.
The return to Imperial space was not a victory parade. It was a somber, clandestine affair. The righteous furies slipped into a high anchorage over Mars, and we were immediately sequestered. The Grey Knights departed without a word, their silence more telling than any debrief. Inquisitive Valeriana was summoned to the highest levels of the Inquisition on Terra. Saitama and I were taken to a secure facility on Luna, a place so secret it didn't officially exist. It was a prison for ideas too dangerous to be known, and Saitama was the most dangerous idea of all. He was given comfortable quarters, access to any food he desired, within reason, and a state-of-the-art training room, but it was still a gilded cage. I was his permanent warden, his only link to the outside world. Weeks turned into months. The reports that trickled down to me were disturbing.
The galaxy was in an uproar. The destruction of the Blackstone Fortress had created a power vacuum that had ignited a new Black Crusade. The death of the Dark Apostle Malachar had caused a civil war within the Word-Bearers that was spilling into Imperial space. The redirected Tyranid splinter fleet had indeed consumed the Exodite world, drawing the wrath of the Eldari, who were now launching retaliatory raids against Imperial worlds they blamed for the inaction. Taldir had been right. Saitama's actions, while solving immediate local problems, were causing catastrophic systemic shocks across the entire galaxy. He was a stone, creating a tsunami with every splash. The highest echelons of the Imperium were locked in a silent, desperate debate. What was to be done with the anomaly? One faction, led by a radical arm of the Inquisition, argued for utilization. They saw Saitama as the ultimate weapon, a tool to be pointed at the Eye of Terror itself. Let him punch Abaddon, the Despoiler. Let him punch a demon Primarch. Let him end the long war. Another faction, the Traditionalists and the Ecclesiarchy, saw him as the ultimate heresy. He was a living refutation of the need for the God-Emperor's grace. His power came from no divine source, acknowledged no God, followed no doctrine. He was, in their eyes, an atheistic abomination that could shatter the imperial creed if his existence became widely known. They argued for permanent containment, or failing that, final sanctification, an act everyone knew was impossible. The Adeptus Mechanicus had their own agenda. They were fascinated by him. They saw his body not as that of a man, but a perfect, perpetual motion machine, a source of infinite energy that defied the law of conservation. They desperately wanted to study him, to dissect him, to understand the physics he so casually violated. I was called to testify before a closed conclave of these powerful beings. I stood in a dark chamber, facing holographic projections of inquisitorial lords, a fabricator general, and a representative of the Adeptus Custodes himself. Sergeant Marcus. The voice of the custodian was a low, resonant boom that vibrated in my bones. You have been his closest observer. Is he controllable? Can he be reasoned with? I thought of Saitama's simple desires, his boredom, his utter indifference to our politics and our gods. My lord, I said, my voice steady despite my fear. He is not a weapon. He is a man. A very simple man. You cannot point him at a target like a missile. He goes where his whims take him. The only thing that motivates him is the pursuit of a challenge. And I hesitated. And so far, he has found none in our galaxy. A stunned silence filled the chamber. None, the fabricator general buzzed. He found a bio-titan unchallenging? He was annoyed that it was too loud, my lord. He considered the Blackstone Fortress anticlimactic. His primary concern, after repelling a hive fleet, was the state of his gloves. The silence deepened. I had just confirmed their greatest fear and their greatest frustration. The most powerful being they had ever encountered was not just apathetic to their cause, he was underwhelmed by their greatest enemies. Then what? The custodian asked, his voice like grinding stone. Does he want? I said, he wants to go home, my lord. He wants to find a good supermarket. He wants to watch television. He is fundamentally bored. The conclave dismissed me. I returned to Saitama's quarters. He was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Hey, Marcus, any news? Can I leave yet? Not yet, sir, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. This is worse than being stuck inside on a rainy day. He sat up. You know, back home, there was always some weird monster showing up. It was annoying, but at least it was something to do.
Here, after you punch one big thing, there's just more waiting. And the big things aren't even that big. He was homesick. The god of punching was lonely. It was then that I truly understood the tragedy of Saitama. He was not a savior. He was not a destroyer. He was the ultimate paradox. The strongest man in any universe, cursed to never find a fight that could make him feel alive. Our grimdark galaxy, with all its endless cosmic horrors, was to him a bland, monotonous disappointment. The Imperium had a new dilemma. It wasn't how to use him. It was how to deal with a force of nature that found their entire bloody struggle boring. And bored, apathetic gods are the most unpredictable ones of all.
The end began not with a bang, but with a pop. I was in my adjacent quarters when I heard it, a small, localized sound of tearing reality. I rushed into Saitama's room to find him holding the glowing widget he had picked up from the Blackstone fortress. It was hovering an inch above his palm, spinning rapidly and emitting a high-pitched whine. "Huh," he said, "this thing just started buzzing." Before I could speak, the widget flared with blinding light. A rift, identical to the one that had brought him to this universe, tore open in the middle of the room. It was a window, and through it I didn't see the warp. I saw a clean, sunlit street with recognizable, if oddly designed, buildings. I heard the sound of distant traffic. It was his world, City Z. The fortress device had somehow latched on to his unique dimensional signature, his home frequency, and now, triggered by some unknown timer or condition, it was reopening the door. "Whoa!" Saitama's eyes widened, the most emotion I had ever seen on his face. "That's my street! That's the convenience store with the half-off sushi after 6. He took a step towards the rift. "Saitama, wait!" I cried out. He paused and looked back at me. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't boredom. It was a faint hint of gratitude, pity. I couldn't tell. "Thanks for the stuff, I guess. It was an experience. Tell the serious lady and the guys in the shiny armor I said bye." "The Imperium, they'll never stop looking for a way to reach you," I said, a sudden strange sorrow gripping me. This walking calamity was about to leave, and I felt only loss. Saitama shrugged. "If they can find me, and if they want to fight, tell them to bring their best. I'm always looking for a good match." He said it, but we both knew he didn't believe they could. He turned back to the rift. But then he stopped again. His shoulders slumped slightly, his voice barely audible. "It's just going to be the same, isn't it? Back to the same routine, the same boring monsters, no one there who can—" He didn't finish the sentence. He took a deep breath, and the bored mask slipped back into place. "Well, a promise is a promise. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and a 10-kilometer run, every day." He stepped through the rift, and it snapped shut behind him, vanishing with a final pop, leaving me alone in the suddenly, terribly empty room. The only thing left was the faint scent of ozone and the crushing, absolute silence. The bald fall was over. Inquisitive Valeriana arrived moments later with a full squad of tech priests. They scanned every inch of the room, but found nothing. The anomaly was gone. The official report stated that the extremis-level anomalous entity had undergone a spontaneous, uncontrolled dimensional reversion. The incident was classified extremis periculum exterminatus and sealed for all time. I was debriefed, promoted, and given a quiet, comfortable posting on a peaceful agri-world, a reward for my service and a way to keep me silent. But I never forgot. I sometimes look up at the night sky, at the countless stars, each one a battlefield, a graveyard, a bastion of faith or heresy. I think of the endless war, the laughter of the dark gods, the silent hunger of the hive mind, the unyielding resolve of the Imperium, and I remember the bald man in the yellow suit who found it all boring.
He was a paradox, a glitch, a moment of impossible simplicity in an impossibly complex and dark universe. He wasn't the hero we needed. He wasn't the hero we deserved. He was just a man who wanted a challenge. And in a galaxy defined by struggle, he never found one. The Imperium moved on. The long war continues. The God Emperor still sits on the golden throne. But somewhere, in a universe not our own, a man named Saitama is doing his daily workout, hoping that today, just maybe, he'll find a monster that can survive a single punch. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But for one brief, shattering moment, there was also a sigh.